Okay, I think we're good. Go ahead.
Sweet. So I don't have any community updates for myself. Terry, you want to go next?
Sure. So we have, before I do my updates, we'll just point out now that we're on the recording, we have new people on the call today, which is really awesome. We have Ben, who works at Apple, and we have Jessica, who just joined Protocol Labs. This is very awesome. And we have our longtime participant, Stan Shields, who runs the Protoschool chapter in Denver, and Portia and I and Michael on the IPFS community team. So it's awesome to see more faces today. And there's a link, if anybody hasn't found it yet, in the chat here to get to the agenda and meeting notes. So you can pop your name in the list of attendees there. We usually use our GitHub handles if you have one. So yeah, updates on my end, mostly related to Protoschool. So we have 2 new chapters as of this morning in, I will butcher this, Hangzhou, China, and Taipei, Taiwan, which is awesome. And a couple more kind of in the works. And I've published a Protoschool roadmap and Q2 OKRs. I think I might have given folks on this call kind of a sneak preview as I was starting in that process, but you can go there, you can follow the links in the agenda to go see those in more detail. And I also went a couple of weeks ago to Lisbon with the IPFS GUI team. They're going to be helping, they've already started helping with a lot of Protoschool stuff in Q2. And part of that is because we want to try to add a lot more content before IPFS camp that happens in late June. And we need some UX improvements to make it easier for people to add new tutorials. A lot of those will be authored by other people around Protocol Labs as they're getting ready for the content for the camp. So I've had a lot of help from Diogo lately to make some UX improvements. So a couple of the things that are now happening, let me, somewhere here I have this slide open. Share my screen for 1 second. So if anyone hasn't seen Protoschool before, this is it. This is the site that offers interactive tutorials. And what's new here that's already merged is that we now have landing. So before we could see a list of all of these, but if you were to click this link, it would just go to the first, drop you right into the first lesson because we didn't have this concept of a landing page within the tutorial. And Diogo has made it so we now have like that same format, but structured in its own component. So you can get a little more oriented, and that's going to be great for social sharing. So if you wanted to share the link specifically to this whole tutorial, you could use this URL to do it. And what's very exciting now, this is a minor accomplishment, but I think it will really help as we try to promote our work, is we also now have working social cards thanks to some new metadata. So at the moment, because this is an SPA, we can't really distinguish between the tutorials and give them their own meta tags. That's something hopefully we'll be able to figure out how to do in the future. So at the moment, the card is the same regardless of what specific link you're pointing to, but sharing that specific link would get the user to that tutorial. So we've made it a little easier to share, and that the improvement that you see here is just part of a much bigger restructure under the hood that makes it a lot easier when you're adding a new tutorial to not have to change the code in as many different places, to kind of generate lists of tutorials like this more automatically. So you're not going in and typing a bunch of information all over the place. So Diogo's done a lot of awesome work here. And then I don't know if I'm really on the right branch for this or not, but we can find out. Nope. Yeah, so the other piece that I'm working on is a tutorial on working with files in Protoschool. So let me fix the view here. Okay, I'm working on a tutorial on working with files as opposed to DAG objects and stuff like that. And I've narrowed the scope since the last time I was on this call. So we're really focusing specifically on MFS, the mutable file system now with that lesson. We were going to do a tutorial on the non-MFS commands first using files and then do MFS, but we're refocusing in part because blobs are not quite yet supported with those non-MFS commands, although that's in progress. And in part from a perspective from a few folks that MFS is kind of the easier version to learn, and then thinking of, even though it's a little less accurate for what's happening under the hood, teaching that first, that's simpler. It looks like commands you'd use on your command line, and then later considering it more advanced to do the other stuff. So I've worked on lessons so far on files.write and ls and make dir, and I'm continuing on from there. And as part of that project, Diogo is looking at ways that we could change our validation. Right now, when you hit submit and submit your code, first it's going through either like syntax error that we think is coming from the Monaco editor, or it's getting some messages sent back. When you do something in IPFS that you're not doing right, IPFS gives you errors back. So it's printing those first if they exist, and it's not actually evaluating your code for the things we're trying to check for. So he's seeing how we can kind of change the setup so that we could replace IPFS error messages that are auto-generating but aren't super useful for our use case, and replace them with ones that we're specifically making for each lesson. So he's working on that. So a lot of what I have coming up is just improving that files tutorial, which is the next one we want to get out the door. Also, I've been working on Offline Camp. For those who haven't heard of it before, it's a tech retreat for the offline first community. So people who are interested in making apps work offline or in low bandwidth conditions. This is not specific to decentralized, although there are a lot of people who cross over from the decentralized community and are also interested in that use case. So we have a teaser on Twitter right now, which has our dates, August 2nd to 5th. And I hopefully will be launching next week and opening the application process. So stay tuned if you're interested in that. And then I also dropped into the notes here some information on IPFS Camp in case we haven't officially announced that on this call. So IPFS Camp, first ever, will happen June 27th to 30th in Barcelona. So it's workshops, hacking, collaboration, which will both give you an opportunity to kind of get up to speed on what IPFS lets you do, but also kind of shape the direction of the project, think about the next problems we need to solve, propose ways to solve them. So a lot of really collaborative work will happen there. As I mentioned, we hope to have some new Proto School content for some of the workshops there. And applications for that close April 25th, and space is limited. So if you're interested in applying, you can follow the link here, and do be really detailed about the kinds of work that you're doing on the project. There's a selection committee that's reviewing those applications. And part of the goal is that people who go to IPFS Camp are going to be more enabled to help the community grow in the regions they're from. So if you happen to be someone who's leading a Proto School chapter or an IPFS meetup and working on community building already, that is something to mention in your application. I think that is it for me.
You're still muted, Portia.
Okay, now you can hear me. I don't have too many updates, but what I will say is we are seriously thinking about, oops. As you can see, I've just broken my part of my keyboard, so give me a moment. There we go. So for Q2, we're seriously Q2, we're going to start this overhaul of docs. We have an issue. I wrote some different questions that we have about the documentation, some research. So before we actually begin starting this, like if you could just look over some of the resources that we have, if you have any input, that would be great. And I would say that would be like one of my updates, and that's it. So just take a look at issue 367. We'll definitely appreciate it. Thanks. It's the right one. Okay.
Sweet. Awesome. Also, in the chat, Terry, I sent a link to a plugin in Vue that could help us get the right metadata on different pages for those cards. However, it probably still won't work until we do that whole move to Zeit so that we have like full URLs.
Yeah, I'm assuming it's dependent on some of the other plans, but I'll copy that out and paste it in.
Yeah, yeah. Even once we have full URLs, though, we would need to do something like this in order to get the right data.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Cool. Cool. All right. Well, let's check in with some of the community folks. I'm gonna start from just like my top. So that's Ben is first. What's up, Ben?
Hey, y'all. Yeah, I just jumped in. Because of my employer, I'd love to start getting some contributing. I love the IPFS community. I'm looking to start contributing some. Maybe able to even start a chapter on the East Coast at some point. Portia, I'll follow up with you on this because it'll be cool. But yeah, I'm just starting to get my feet wet, and it's rad. It's good to see all y'all. Nice to meet folks that I haven't met yet, and good to see folks that I haven't seen for a while. Michael, you're on mute still.
Yeah, continuing down, it's Jim is next in my list.
Not too much happening here, but just trying to keep tabs on things and sort of thinking forward towards IPFS camp. And I'm going to be helping develop one of the courses there. So I'd like to see how it all fits together. Course will probably revolve around how to develop apps that work with IPFS, but that's a little undefined what we're actually going to teach. So I want it to be in sync with protocol, obviously.
Very cool. And then Jessica? Jessica, do you have any update or anything? Or hi, by the way. Oh, it went away.
Oh, now Michael's frozen for me. Exciting times.
Yeah, for me too.
And if Jessica's talking to us, she's on mute. Fun times. Dan, do you have any updates if you can still talk?
Sure. Really great to see some new people. I've been gone for a few, so it's good to be back. And some exciting news on my end is I have a pretty good amount of momentum here in the local community to build out a really interesting IPFS-based project, which I'll definitely be updating you guys more on, but we're actively seeking some funding to help support us all. But I think right now we've got a ragtag team of like 5 to 10, and there's an increasing interest in general in decentralized systems. IPFS and DAT are kind of hot topics in the community right now, which is pretty exciting to see. So, and then I'm very excited to see the IPFS camp come about. I'll definitely be putting my hat in the ring to try and get out there to learn more and to get more involved. And along with that, I have not been following the exact tutorial developments. It's really cool to see what you guys have been up to in the back end. But in terms of the actual tutorials themselves, I'd love to be able to help write some of that as well. So is there an outline of where we can start potentially contributing something there?
Sorry, finding my unmute button. So the one that's in progress right now, that is the thing we're definitely working on, is this file upload one that I'm looking at. So we could check in on that if you want to do any work on that. Be happy to have you involved. And beyond that, I think the next real priority is going to be looking at the content that's needed for IPFS camp. So I can let you know when we get closer to that. Okay. I think a lot of the proposals that have been made for tutorials beyond that. So in the issues for Proto School, if you click on like the new tutorials tag, you can see what's been proposed. A lot of those right now, those proposals don't fit within the guidelines for where we're starting with Proto School. So for example, and you can see this in kind of the guiding principles in the roadmap, we want to be really beginner friendly, try not to build advanced content without building the intermediate content that gets us there. And that means that for the moment, we're sticking to, for example, JS IPFS in the web browser to do those tutorials right there, not adding command line stuff, for example. So there are a lot of proposals that are going to be more in the future. As we get suggestions in for IPFS camp and we start working on that content, we may get a better sense of like what other supplementary stuff we need to fill in that gap. So I'll keep people updated as we figure out kind of what are the things coming next. But if you want to help with any of the file upload stuff, you and I can connect. on that PR that's in progress. And then feel free, everyone should feel free to keep proposing new tutorials, and that like the blocker between you proposing a tutorial and you building a tutorial is this process of thinking through where it fits in the curriculum and making sure that we're doing things in the right order. Does that help a bit?
Yeah, that helps a lot.
Okay.
I also see in the chat that Jessica, you're coming out to Boulder pretty soon. Is that right?
I'm actually probably moving back to Boulder. So,
awesome.
Yeah, I'm going to be working on slightly different stuff. I'm like brand new, so my goal this week is to sit in on like every meeting I possibly can, just for context. But it's awesome to hear that there's so much of a community in the Front Range. So I definitely want to stay looped in on that.
Yep, you can definitely come and join the troop out here. It's fun.
Sweet. Awesome. Yeah, let's keep chatting.
Perfect.
So Jessica, we couldn't hear you earlier if you were talking to us. Was there anything you wanted to chat about on the community front?
I like I said, I'm just trying to get as much context as I can. So
yeah.
I'm like gate crashing everybody's meetings. Thanks for letting me sit.
Yes, no problem.
But I really have like virtually nothing of any value to add at this moment. So
no problem. Lurkers are very common and very welcome on most calls to find across the IPFS project. So I will just mention one thing in case anyone is new to IPFS in general and hasn't seen this distinction. There are two calls that are kind of confused with each other often. So this call is about building the IPFS community. So efforts like Proto School that are meant to specifically grow the community. There's another call that happens on Mondays, which you can also find on the IPFS calendar, that I think is called IPFS Weekly Call at the moment. Yeah, and that's one that Portia runs, which...
That's my call, yeah.
Do you want to tell us about it?
Yeah. So the IPFS Weekly Call is more of it's like a lightning talk every Monday where people within the community who are actually using IPFS at libp2p, like in production or in their projects, can show how they're using IPFS, like what things they like about it, what are some of the challenges they're facing. And it's a great conversation to see how IPFS is in action in terms of how it's used in the broader community. And it's great. And I would say the community call is, Terry, would you like to say more about the community call?
Yeah, I mean, this one is as I said, about growing the community. So projects you're working on to build the community. And that would include like running IPFS meetups or Proto School chapters, or building cool new tools that will help people understand the technology, increasing education, all of that kind of stuff. So everyone is welcome, of course, on both calls, but they just serve slightly different purposes. And the call Portia was telling us about on Mondays, I love getting to see like in practice what people are building with IPFS, regardless of what that product is then used for, which might not be community building, but it's people from the community showing us the kinds of things they're able to do with the project. So both of those calls are great in different ways. So just wanted to highlight that one exists. Anything else people wanted to chat about?
Portia, is that the one that's at like, I guess 1600 UTC on Mondays?
Yes, it is.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I actually paused because I have been having some time. I will admit this in a recording. I thought until very recently that UTC actually had like daylight savings time, and I found out the hard way that is not true. So I'm still like getting used to the different time zones.
Yeah, I literally just found a clock widget that puts UTC in my menu bar next to real time all the time. And now I feel a lot better about life.
Yeah. Portia and I have had a lot of very confusing conversations lately about time zones, and they were already confusing enough, and we were both going on the wrong assumption about UTC just equaling one of the European time zones, which turns out not to have been true. So it's been some exciting times here.
we also like do actually adjust the meetings when DST happens, so it's not like we keep them consistent. And like I've actually had meetings like bounce around like 2 or 3 times as different countries come into UCC so that we can keep everybody aligned.
Yeah.
Like it's particularly difficult now on IPLD because we have people in Europe and me and somebody in Australia, and so it's just like there's literally like an hour where everybody is awake, and then that hour moves with DST in both Europe and in Australia. So it's really
painful. Jessica just posted, if anybody wants the Mac OS app to have their clock, copy it out of the chat before we hang up here. All right, anything else people want to chat about? We appear to be done. Jessica says thumbs up to saying goodbye.
Mm-hmm. Everybody
Anything
gets
else
back
from you,
5
Mikey?
minutes.
Woo!
6 on my
Yay.
clock.
My clock too, 6 minutes.
Okay, so I was rounding down. My bad. All right. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
y'all. Nice meeting you.
Nice meeting you too.